Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this UHRP event. Today we will be discussing UHRP's most recent report entitled "The Government Never Oppresses Us, China's Proof of Life Videos as Intimidation and Violation of Uyghur Family Unity." We're discussing what UHRP is calling proof of life videos. Produced by state media, these are in some cases hostage-style videos demonstrating that a disappeared individual is alive, or in other cases attempting to discredit and discourage campaigners abroad through implicit threats to their family members. Today, our panelists are Emily Upson, the author and lead researcher of The Government Never Oppresses Us, Ferkat Jawdat, a Uyghur activist whose case is discussed in the report, and William Ni from Chinese Human Rights Defenders. Let's begin with you, Emily, to discuss what's in the report.
Fantastic, thanks, Nicole. So today I thought I would kind of go over some of the main traits of proof of life videos, which is slightly different to the formula that I set out in the report, which focused more on content. This, I was thinking of largely looking at characteristics across videos. The first of which is that they are presented as investigative efforts, as though state media is in real time searching for the welfare of any allegedly missing Uyghur, that they aim to discredit Uyghur human rights concerns or individual testimonies or campaigners, and that each video is presented as reactionary to testimony. And so I was going to play 3 videos or clips of individual videos to illustrate some of this. So Nicole, if you'd play the first one for me.
Sure, I'll pull that one up. Before I do, I just want to remind the audience that we're taking questions. There will be a Q&A period at the end. There's a box in which you can submit your questions on the control panel. And right now I will share the first video.
这个发帖的人发了不少。不是啊，不是。是这个照片。啊，就这个是我。就是咱们找不一样找。我们可以可能换一个这个视角，但是它不是叫，它只是 use 了这个 hashtag。
Fantastic. So I just wanted to show this to illustrate how these videos are presented. That was quite an exaggerated version, but invariably there are traits of, seeing the reporter, go and visit an individual Uyghur in real time, and the scenes that they then find are naturally occurring, and that there's no orchestration behind the scenes or anything like that. But these videos are formulaic, and there's quite a specific pattern that they follow. AP reporter Dale King, I think, even produced a screenshot which suggests that the state media workers behind the scenes are receiving quite specific directives in terms of who they're meant to be finding and what these videos are meant to be showing. This would make sense given that the outlets that are publishing these videos, they're all following the same kind of patterns. Global Times, CGTN News, Xinhua Directly, China Daily. They're absolutely not spontaneous investigative efforts, but clearly that's how they're trying to present these videos. It should go without saying that the state cannot validly investigate itself. So that's kind of one of the main traits I wanted to talk about. And the second one is like attempts to discredit Uyghur concerns. So Nicole, if you'll play the second clip for me.
我是昭苏县妇联副主席哈迪夏，沙伊拉鼓励沙乌提巴裔，他虐待儿童、诈骗金钱、生活作风败坏。像他这样一个品质恶劣、满嘴胡话的人，居然还能获得美国颁发的国际妇女勇气奖。以这样的标准去评判，难道你们美国对妇女的评判标准就是这样的吗？真是天下奇闻，特别可笑。他就是妇女中典型的败类，就是人渣，这是对妇女人权和发展事业的侮辱。
Fantastic, thanks. So this clip was taken from Cyber Salt Bay's video. There were two that were kind of produced or published, and this one was from the slightly longer one on Global Times Twitter account rather than CGTN's YouTube account. And it was a lot longer and a lot nastier. And it was quite a stark character assassination. These videos don't normally offer any kind of credible explanation or alternative to what's happening, but ad hominem attacks or any kind of way to discredit the person making claims or giving testimony as to the conditions in East Turkestan, they're quite clumsy for anybody who has researched China's human rights conditions. And in that video, it talks about Cyrigul's sexual morality, among other things. It's quite distasteful. And to many people, that will seem a little 1984, but it's also important to remember that a lot of people do believe these videos. And people that I know personally who I would otherwise think were quite smart would, question Uyghur human rights based on these videos, which I find quite shocking in some ways. But I think the strategy of just creating doubt in each individual claim that pops up is more important than creating like a consistent alternative across a variety of claims. Kind of discrediting one testimony at a time. So the last trait I wanted to talk about was being reactive in these videos, or the videos at least being presented as reactive. So if you play the last clip, Nicole.
When Aziz Issa Elkun's father died, it was too dangerous for him to go to the funeral in China.
This report by CNN released on January 2nd claims authorities have been demolishing graves in China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It highlighted the story of Aziz Elkun, a Uyghur poet now living in the UK.
What happened to your father's remains? I don't know. I have no idea.
After a 4-hour drive from the city of Upson in southern Xinjiang, we arrived at the house of Aziz's family and met his mother, Hepizem, and his sister, Berlan. After a few exchanges, they took us to the place where Aziz's father, Isa Abdullah, is now buried.
So these are obviously quite hard videos to watch sometimes. It's quite clear each kind of characteristic within that video itself. The idea that this is an investigation into international concerns and allegations. It's discrediting what Aziz has said, but it's also quite specifically reactive, and it's citing exactly what it's reacting to. So these videos, they are largely reactive to the kind of scale of reception that they're going to get. So exactly who's going to be responding, how many, retweets, or what kind of impact each testimony is making. But it's also looking at larger allegations, and in this case, burial sites and the desecration of burial sites, in a similar way, with some kind of focus on feminist issues. They published a proof of life video for Halina Halik, where they were looking more at issues of female empowerment. And with the US report for human rights in China, a lot of these videos were citing that report in 2019 before the report had been published, which was curious, to say the least. But I think that sometimes these reactions aren't necessarily to the thing that they're citing. These videos are being published for reasons, and it's always about individual testimony, especially when talking about a larger issue. They've never spoken about Shahid Xinjiang Victims Database, and I think that's because it would be far too difficult to discredit, because there's so much testimony on that site. So it's really picking out individuals to react to. Nicole, I'm sure I've rambled on for enough time, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. So,
thank you. That was a very good, concise overview of our report, which of course goes into a lot of depth of analysis of how these videos are laid out. Let's turn now to Ferkat Jawdat. His case is discussed in our report, and so he'll give us some background on his experience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so just kind of some background story about myself. I have been living in the US for 11 years right now, and currently working as a software engineer contractor for the healthcare.gov. So along with my 3 other siblings, I came to the US in 2011, and then my dad, he came in 2006. So it's been more than 15 years that my mom and my dad got separated from each other. And then more than 10 years that my mom is living by herself without all 4 kids and then her husband. So we tried all the legal ways to get her a Chinese passport and then get her to the US. But the Chinese government, they comes up with all different reasons every single time to deny issuing her a Chinese passport, even though she was already cleared by the US government side. So in 2017, between November and early December, she was detained for the first time, but she was released after 22 days. And then the second time, on February 6, 2018, she sent a message on the WeChat saying that she was going to the school again, and then she doesn't know when she can come back or if she can come back. So after a month, another 5 people from my father's side were all detained in the same day. So here in the US, myself, my family, and other relatives, we decided to wait because we were scared that if we choose to speak out against the Chinese government on behalf of our family members, that they will punish our loved ones in the camps. But after waiting for more than 7 months and then without hearing anything about my mom, so I started speaking out. But ever since then, I keep getting direct or indirect threats from the Chinese government, the Chinese secret agents, or the Chinese police. So I gave speeches at the universities, different events, and then gave interviews to all different major news outlets. And the New York Times, they made a podcast story on the daily about my story as well. Finally, after more than 17 months, my mom was being released from the camp. But within 17 months, she was transferred back and forth between multiple camps. And then she was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison at some point, also being transferred to a prison in early 2019. But because of my activities, because of I'm speaking out, and then the public pressure from the media and then the US side as well, that she was released on end of May 2019. In that year, 2019 November, the US State Department, they made a statement about myself and then a few other Uyghurs here in the US about our family members being detained in the camps and then being threatened. After a couple of days, the Chinese government, they released their video similar as what Emily showed earlier, that where my mom was speaking and then saying that she has been living nicely, and then how the government is taking care of her, how much love that she gets from the government. Actually, even before the video was released, I knew that was coming, and then I tweeted about it as well, because a few days earlier that when I was speaking to my mom, she told me that there's some reporters and the government officials coming to her house, taking pictures, videos of her holding up apple or drinking a tea or looking at the pictures. So I knew it was coming, and then I just tweeted about it. After 3 days, the video was out. And then on their statement and in the article as well, that they said my mom has never been detained, and then she was living in China because she failed to obtain the US visa, not because of the Chinese passport. So they just discredit everything that I have been speaking of. And then also they linked me to the World Uyghur Congress, called the World Uyghur Congress as a terrorist organization, and then also say that I make my living by splitting China, spreading lies. So for the second time, right after former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo declared the Chinese policy to the Uyghurs as a genocide on his last day in office, the next day the Chinese government released another statement directly linking me and then another Uyghur activist, Arafat Erkin, to the former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and then comparing myself to the Bin Laden, where they say that the Pompeo is sponsoring and supporting the terrorist organizations, and then he has been having secret meetings with us, although I just met him like one time officially in 2019. So that's kind of about my background story.
Thank you very much for that, Ferkat. Let's move on now to William Nee.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me, and and thanks for sharing your story, Ferkat. That's really kind of powerful and disturbing. I guess what I'll try to do is take a little bit of a step back and talk about how some of these forced confession videos have been used elsewhere in China, and also, like Emily did, kind of look at some of the characteristics. And what I thought would be helpful is actually taking a look at the Wang Yu confession video. So to take a step back, if we look maybe 10 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about how Chinese human rights lawyers could use the law, use the criminal procedure law to protect rights according to the various international human rights obligations that China has taken on. And this, to some extent, came to a head in July 9th, 2015, when Wang Yu, a female human rights lawyer, was detained. And this started a big crackdown that has become known as the 709 crackdown, where 250 lawyers and activists were rounded up in a coordinated action around the country. And I think it's significant because Wang Yu had taken on cases related to petitioners' rights, a lot of economic, social, and cultural rights, but also the Feminist Five. And she'd also taken on Ilham Tohti's case. And so, to the best of my knowledge, in all the Uyghur cases of people who have been sentenced, to the best of my knowledge, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I have not seen any lawyers or any lawyers of choice in any of those cases. So this to some extent, ended with the lawyers' crackdown. Now, what's also significant is that she went into an enforced disappearance, the residential surveillance in a designated location, where the government can keep people to up to 6 months without lawyers, without contact with the outside world. And so, to a large extent, people did not know her health condition, what was happening to her, whether she was being tortured. And meanwhile, her son, who I believe was 16 at the time, wanted to go abroad to Australia, and he was just about to get on the plane when this had happened in 2015. So while she was in detention, or what also makes her case significant is that she did this video on August 1st, 2016, which I'm about to talk about. But then later, she basically gave the backstory to what happened to her giving this video. And that's available on China Change. So I'll tweet that out after this is done, and anyone can read that and kind of see what went into, or what it was like to be pressured into making this video. There are some elements that I think are obvious. There was psychological intimidation towards her. She'd just been in residential surveillance, was subjected to torture and other ill treatment, and was in a very delicate state. And then she had people who were kind of nicer to her, if you will, who were saying, you know, basically trying to be the good cop, bad cop while she was detained. There was the love of her family. I think whether you're Chinese, Uyghur, or whatever, you love your family. And they were able to use this love of her family against her. And they, you know, one of her interrogators said to her, think carefully. If you don't agree to go on television, how will you be able to get out? How will your husband, who's Bao Longjun, who was also detained, how will your husband Bao Longjun be able to get out? How will your son ever be able to go abroad? So there was this manipulation of your behavior affects not only you, but your husband, your son. So that was very powerful. And then there was also, when she did the confession, it was shocking. I remember at the time, you know, people were wondering about her case. She came up, it was broadcast on Phoenix TV, Oriental Daily, and the paper, so kind of compliant state media or state media adjacent. And this was right after the South China Sea arbitration decision. And interestingly, she had also just won 2 human rights awards, the Ludwig Treville International Human Rights Award, and on August 6th, which is only a few days later, she was going to win the American Bar Association's first ever International Human Rights Award. But she said, using the same language that state media was using for the arbitration decision, 我不承认, 我不认可, 我不接受. It's like, I will not accept this award. And she said, these Western forces have used my family's situation to defame the image of the Communist Party and the government. So she was, in a very creepy way, using her own personal situation to give messages related to international relations, and kind of trying to, as Emily was saying, discredit the people who are trying to show her bravery and show how she had been contributing to human rights. She was trying to discredit those same people who are giving her the award. And she was saying that she won't accept the award. So there's that kind of similarity of trying to discredit, you know, people abroad. And this was also an element that we saw in the Gui Minhai case, where Gui Minhai, I'm sure most people on this are familiar, was the Swedish publisher who was detained while taken away while in Thailand. And he made 3 forced confession videos, the last of which also gave a message, an international relations message, a message to Sweden, where he said, looking back, I might have become Sweden's chess piece. My wonderful life here has been ruined, and I will never trust the Swedish ever again. So again, this is a very kind of creepy thing where they're putting words into the mouths of people to give a message to those who are overseas. But I think it also gives a message to other activists and to other people within the target community. You know, I don't necessarily think that these videos, whether it's the Wang Yu or the Gui Minhai video or some of these Uyghur videos, are things that are being watched by the multitudes that in China. I mean, I don't think most people who are just kind of concerned about entertainment in their daily lives are paying attention. To some extent, it's a message to other people in the target community. So in the case of Wang Yu and human rights lawyers, you might say, we knew Wang Yu was this ferocious, kind of powerful, willing to use the law very, very diligently and forcefully. And here she is giving this, confession, like what must have happened to her to have gone to this. And I think for Uyghurs who have seen their parents say words in their mouth that they could never imagine, discrediting their own sons and daughters, I mean, it must just be heartbreaking, and it must strike fear into people. So I think that that's one of the kind of the uses of these videos, is not really to convince the vast majority of people on Weibo or whatever. It's to strike fear into the hearts of people who are connected with these. So I think that is about some of the main points that I wanted to talk about, but I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was a very valuable overview of the situation, placing these Uyghur videos in context. I would like to move into a discussion portion of the event, but I want to remind the audience again that there will be a Q&A period. So please type your questions into the question box, and we will read them out to our panelists at the end.
Let me interrupt.
Nicole, I want to add a point to William's earlier statement. So, William, I agree with you 100% that those videos, like, they're not being watched like millions or like a couple hundred millions of times, but it's mainly directly to the people, and then the people around them, like my story as well. So, like, I knew personally kind of like the background of how that video was made about my mom, like how much time that she spent like holding apple, or like that telling them that how much love, the care that she receives from the Chinese government after spending like more than almost a year and a half in the camps or the prison. And then also on the same time, after this second statement, they called me like terrorist again, and then compared me to the Bin Laden. So my mom is being watched every moment. Wherever she goes, there is a police or there is some government officials follows her. And then also, like, another really sad thing is that she cannot go to any like hospital right now. She is not being allowed, or she doesn't get the care that she needs. And then just some time ago, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, after this the genocide declaration from the US government side, like my mom just told me that, like, son, please ask your sisters or brother to like do something about my case, try to bring me to the US, but not yourself, because if you do something that the people around me, they understand in a different way. So I know that she's getting the pressure because of what I do, and then like mostly I'm sure that she will get some more pressure because of today's event as well. But it's also at the same time the signal to the other people, like to myself and the other Uyghur activists, like, hey, look how much we can control you or your family. It's not something that's directly threatening me in the US soil, but those kind of threats coming from my mom directly, or that the invisible threats from my mom to what I do in the US, is that I cannot prove it, even though there is a law in the US that the Human Rights Policy Act that asks the FBI to collect those kind of data, but there is no way that I can prove that I am being harassed or threatened by the Chinese government because of what I do here in the US.
Thank you very much for that, Ferkat. I would like to start by asking Emily a question regarding to what degree do these videos serve as a confirmation of how difficult it is for Uyghurs to communicate with their families? For example, you mentioned in the report the video of Imanjan Sayedin telling his daughter that the reason he hadn't been in contact with her for a year was that he was away from a work trip. You also mentioned some videos that were responding to Still No Info hashtag that came out, but you mentioned that that was not included in the report's analysis. Could you speak a bit about these types of videos and again about how they fit into the communication blackout in the region?
Absolutely. So these, the videos that weren't included were largely from YouTube accounts that we just couldn't verify. It wasn't clear that they were coming from government state media, but a lot of the clips were quite similar. So Mehmet Totiatarullah's brother, Rosie, he was included, he was featured in one of these videos. And Mehmet actually hadn't seen the video when I found it. It had something like 36 views. And this account had a lot of these types of videos, all of individuals, you know, some of which we did manage to locate their campaigning relatives, but it's very obscure, the reasoning for that kind of publication of video, and how communication is blocked. The proof of life video for Aziz Niyaz and his wife was interesting because there were 3 videos, 3 different outfit changes, and in the second video, I think they were published not in chronological order, but they, you know, revealed in live time that their daughter had said online that they were missing, and they cried on camera, which was particularly odd, and they said words to the effect of, oh, if she really misses us, then why doesn't she contact us? But one of the questions might be, why haven't they contacted their daughter in a year and a half? And why would they produce this video and feature in this video and not freely communicate instead? It's particularly odd, and I'm not sure that this alternative explanation, right, that they just haven't been in touch, is valid. I'm not sure that these videos are interested in creating a cogent alternative to what these testimonies are saying. But it's like ideological whack-a-mole, if you like, just refuting one thing at a time. But the alternative isn't really there. And I was actually wondering if William or Ferkat had any ideas, because something I found quite curious in a lot of these videos is that the reasoning for why they're being published why the testimonies, are, you know, keep happening is just Western forces, or like a malicious manipulation of innocent Uyghurs who are just trying to live well. And if you try to pin anyone down, it never gets more specific. It's just a malicious Western force. I don't know if in other Chinese human rights testimonies that differs.
Could I maybe answer that, or try to? I mean, I think one thing is worth making explicit, although I think everybody probably here knows it, is that you know, communicating with the outside world for Uyghurs has become basically very risky. You know, if you communicate via WhatsApp, having WhatsApp is something that could send you to the camps or prison, or saying anything, communicating externally on a foreign website I was a China researcher at Amnesty International, and one of the cases I documented was of a man named Ferkat Abbasi, who was at the time, I think he was 40 years old. He was an ethnic Tatar. There's only about 50,000 Tatars in China, but he was one of them. He had become a Uyghur medicine practitioner, had a successful business. You know, he had 3 kids. So he had, you know, I mean, just the total, you know, ideal citizen in many ways. And his brother came from Russia, who's living in Russia, and just used a foreign website. And this was in 2017, before a lot of the really bad stuff became kind of common knowledge. And because of that, the internet police came to his house and detained Ferkat Abbasi. No one's heard of him ever since. He's been detained, and his kids are basically living with their mom. It's a tragic situation, but this is the risk that people use if they're communicating. So I think when state media says, oh, well, why, if you're missing your family, why don't you just call them? It's really, I think it's pernicious, because they are communicating, whether it's in Global Times or China Daily, to an audience perhaps of Chinese overseas people who say, oh, I talk to my mom in Shanghai all the time. And they think it's the same. And obviously it's not the same. But I mean, I think it's worth making that explicit. But then in terms of the Western forces, I think that that's another way to discredit the testimony of anyone or the activism of anyone, by just lumping it together with the Western forces and saying it's part of this broader narrative of the Western forces to you know, suppress China and go against China. And I think that that's always a default mechanism that I mentioned. Wang Yu said the Western forces have manipulated me by giving me this human rights award. So they were using the same strategy of trying to connect her to the Western forces, which makes all of the activism done by, whether it's the petitioner trying to get their rights from the developer in the coastal part of China, or the feminist, it diminishes that activism just by tying it to the Western forces. But I think it's a convenient thing, because many people are brought up to believe that the West is out to suppress China, and that you know, Uyghurs or human rights defenders are just kind of pawns in that bigger kind of geopolitical game.
Nicole, you're speaking on mute.
Sorry. I wanted to ask Ferkat if he could possibly give us some of his views about how these videos are impacting the Uyghur community. Would you say that people become more reluctant to speak out if one of their relatives appears in one of these types of videos?
It has both sides. Like, that still no info hashtag became like really popular after like some of the Uyghur people, the Uyghurs, like they start campaigning about their family members or missing relatives, and then they just suddenly pop up on the Chinese media. So they were able to at least see them through the Chinese camera, and then know that they are still alive, because it's been many years, like at least 3-4 years, that there is no information about them, there is no communication, there is no connection. So then it just like at that point it became sudden, like kind of call to action. Like, okay, so if Ferkat can see his mother through like Chinese media, okay, let me do it too. So that kind of urged the Uyghur people to start speaking out about their missing relatives, and then it kind of worked out too. The Chinese government, that they had to answer the questions about those missing people, and then some of them that they were popped up on the Chinese the videos as well. But also on the same time, like it is kind of scary as well too. Like as William said earlier, like you just suddenly seeing your parents or your family members on the Chinese state media or some videos discrediting what you have done for them. Like in my case, like I was kind of lucky enough to able to talk to my mom almost every single day now. not because of how China treats her, but because of what I did. So, like, when we talk, I know how my mom thinks about what I do, but from those videos or from those the statements from Chinese media, that she doesn't like what I do, and then she even thinks that I'm the stain of the family. That's what directly from the Chinese media. But the next day, when I called my mom after seeing that article in the Chinese Global Times, like, I was just kind of joking with her that, Mom, did you call me like stain or trash of the family? She was like, no, I will never do that. But the people who doesn't have a direct communication like I do, like, it's really hard for them to see that they haven't trying their best to, like, get their family members out of those camps, but on the end, that they see their, like, family members, like their parents, just discredit, like, whatever that they have done. So it has, like, both impacts. Like, at some point that it urged the Uyghurs to be more public, but also on the same time that it kind of suppressed some other voices as well.
Yes, I believe that your mother's case is one of the very rare instances where independent reporters could actually go into the region and get a confirmation from an individual there that what was reported in the Chinese state media was not true. Unfortunately, that's become rarer and rarer for a lot of reasons. The access to the region is becoming even more difficult for journalists. I'd like to ask William and anyone else who might have some thoughts to add to this. To what degree has the CCP's messaging on the Uyghur human rights crisis been successful? And specifically in regards to these proof of life videos, are they effective at all, or do they serve more to discredit the state media reporting on this issue?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe I would hand that over to Emily later, but I would say that from my point of view, I don't think that they're successful in convincing skeptical people or people who don't know too much about the issue. I think that they're too planned, as in the one that you showed, too kind of contrived and scripted to convince anyone who's kind of going into the issue with an open mind. But what they may do is, reinforce messages, try, as I was saying, instill fear in people, and from that point of view, potentially they're effective. But overall, I don't see them as very effective. And I think, kind of in the case of the Wang Yu video, I think when that came out, the international community was just baffled. Why would you make this ridiculous video that no one's going to believe for a second? I mean, it almost blew my mind of why would they make this? Like, if I were consulting for the government, I would never in a million years tell them to do this. But they did it anyway. And I think that they're under pressure, or the police who are telling her over and over, you need to do this, you need to read the script, you need to do it again and again. They were under pressure from someone up above. And so who that up above finally is, I don't know. But I think whoever that is doesn't really have a very good understanding of global media and how opinion is made in an open and democratic societies. And there's kind of a mismatch in the messaging. I mean, I think China maybe is successful in other areas in terms of preventing critical mass of the global community to rally around the Uyghur issue and the massive human rights violations we're seeing. Although I think that's changing, but in the videos themselves, I don't think they're too successful. But I don't know what you think, Emily.
I think personally I've definitely seen an increase in quality, just in terms of their strategy, right? The first Uyghur proof of life video was for Abdurrahim Hayat, and that was particularly poor. It was clumsy. It was he was against a grey backdrop, looking particularly ill. I mean, perhaps not even ill, but just quite grey, shaven head. Didn't look like himself, and seemingly reading a script behind the camera. And when he got to the line, "I've not been abused," he smirked a little. So if anything, it just confirmed suspicion, and it announced to a global audience instead of quite a small, subset of the international community who were concerned before. Suddenly, all major news outlets were publishing stories on this. So it wasn't a strategic move at all, but I think they have become somewhat more choreographed and orchestrated and not compelling for many people. I also think a lot of people going into this issue are perhaps wanting China to be an innocent party. And I think if you go into this kind of study thinking that, you're going to find that answer. Also, if you look at it for too long, I don't see how anybody could come to any other conclusion. But I definitely know people who have seen one video and, asked, well, what's wrong with that? Yeah, which is particularly shocking when you work in this area. Actually, Ferkat, I was going to say after we talked about your mother's case, especially with the quote in her article, or like the article that accompanied that proof of life video, I started paying more attention to those accompanying articles, and quite often they make claims that are just not caught on camera. Like in particular, kind of insults towards the campaigning party. But yes, I found it quite interesting that was never, invariably it's a lot harsher, the description, than anything that has been filmed.
I kind of think the similar at some points as well. Like on the beginning when I started speaking out, I had really few followers on Twitter, and then but suddenly this Global Times started showing my pictures or my name, and then talking about me multiple times, and then start issuing a statement. Then I get more attention from the media as well, that it kind of makes me kind of promoting me as well at some point. So it's kind of my personality that I make jokes about many things. So when I was talking to my friends as well, hey, I have to thank the Global Times and the Chinese government, that they are helping me to raise my voice much wider than I thought initially. When there is, because the media always chases after the freshness, but when there is the Chinese government issues a statement about on the personal level, that there are lots of media that they will be interested in my story as well. So, and then it helps me to raise my mother's case even further, even louder, and then gives them more pressure to release her, or do some things that I was expecting as well. So it's kind of double side sword, I would say.
If I can ask one last question before we turn it over to the audience. The report discusses character attacks on women who have testified about their experience in the camps. These attacks have escalated since the release of the BBC report on sexual abuse within the camps. Do these attacks have their intended effect, and do you anticipate more attacks of this nature? I'll leave that open to whoever wants to answer it.
I mean, personally, I think those have been particularly clumsy, particularly poor. And I'm not sure what kind of sympathy state media is getting for those reports. In fact, there are a lot of distasteful responses towards that video in favour of the CCP, but it's interesting because to me, they're not particularly following the formula that I've seen before, and so I'm not quite sure how I would class them at this point.
If I can share one story, the Zumrat Dawood, that she was also being interviewed on that BBC report as well. So I saw her on like Facebook that she took a screenshot of the Chinese state spokesperson that holding her picture about that BBC report and then discrediting her story as well. But she posted on the Facebook proudly because that one person fighting against one of the superpower, and then at the end that she was like, you are being able to let the Chinese government to hold your picture in front of like global audience to discredit like what you just told. So it is kind of like I think from her post that what I understand is, so like many times I understand it, like I feel the same as well, like that you got the credit for your work, that your voice is being heard by the really top level inside the Chinese government as well, that they were being forced to speak up against your story, your testimonies. So from her post as well, that I think she was proud of what she did, and then it also gave her kind of like energy or the like to go more further and then to speak out more often as well.
Thank you very much. I'll now read off some audience questions to our panelists. The first one comes from Professor Magnus Piszczko. He asks, could there be another factor in the videos separate from the effect on audiences? Inside the machine of state power, employees like journalists and police are obligated to produce results that they can report to their superiors. These superiors can tell themselves that they achieved the desired result. The CGTN and GT journalists probably also shield the party bosses from the reality that all this fake video production may be self-defeating and making them look bad. In short, could it be that the self-fulfilling, self-deceiving loop inside the machinery of state power is partly the reason why they keep putting out these nasty videos? And I think he is submitting that to our whole panel.
Yeah, I think that that's a very interesting hypothesis, and something that I've often thought about is that to what extent are these videos and other messaging on the Uyghur human rights crisis or the crisis in the region? Is the intended audience Chinese, powerful Chinese people within the system, you know, who work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and elsewhere? I mean, how can you go about doing your job if you're paying attention to what's actually happening? And it's not just Adrian Zenz. I mean, you can read through so many, as you said, Shabbat's, if you go to and read through the testimonies. I mean, and the satellite evidence, I mean, it's just so overwhelming. So how do you psychologically go about doing your work? Well, I think that, you know, so to what extent are these videos or other state media messaging a way to provide a way for people to go about doing their jobs? I mean, I think, and allow that messaging, you know, it's targeted perhaps at the people within the system itself. I mean, if that's what the professor was getting at, I've often thought that that's maybe the intended audience of some of the messaging, but I don't know what others think.
It actually really reminds me of a study that I wish I could remember the name of. I wish I could remember who published it, but I'll find it and tweet it later. but it kind of focused on how within the CCP, and I can't remember what era either, a lot of problems were kind of created between the disconnect of academics, or policy researchers not being able to say truthfully what the situation was. They would have to keep to the CCP line and not publish the truth. So on no level there was a kind of acknowledgement of reality on the ground, just reality as the CCP chose to see it. And then there was, a huge problem in implementation, because all of these policies that would have been great for, the dream situation just weren't practical for what was actually happening. And it reminds me a little of that. A lot of these videos work if you believe China. They work if you already are on board. But for an international audience, they're completely inappropriate. So I wonder if it's that kind of refusal to acknowledge that kind of alternative perception.
We have another question that relates to the one Magnus asked from Phoebe Ward. Is there a degree to which the higher-ups function like a particularly malevolent studio executives, people who think they have a handle on what the audience wants, but are often more than a little out of touch with how the work they direct is received? I'm not sure if William Nee, if you have any insight on how these state media apparatuses actually work behind the scenes.
Well, I mean, I would refer people to a report done by Safeguard Defenders, which took a look at the forced confession videos and the planning that went into it. And there's they show that the scripted nature, how it's rehearsed many times. So yeah, I mean, I think that there is that degree of a malevolent studio executive, but I think it's a no. I really don't know who the intended audience of that malevolent studio executive is. Are they trying to put words in the people that will then please their superiors? I mean, I think that that's probably the case, at least in some of the human rights defenders videos, where you have Wang Yu pledging her, support to the party, or Gui Minhai denouncing Sweden. I mean, there, I think the intended audience is probably higher ups in the party, and they're not primarily thinking about global audiences and the questions global audiences might have, and then trying to develop a narrative that would then convince them. So I don't think that they're focus group testing people who are following this issue in the global South, seeing what messages would resonate, and then making the videos. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I think that it's much more kind of directed towards people higher up in the party. But I could be wrong, and that's just to the best of my knowledge what's happening. It's probably people in the Ministry of State Security and public security apparatus.
Avi Ackerman asks a question that follows up nicely on the comments William just made, which is, how do proof of life videos disseminated for a global audience differ from the ones shown within China, if there are indeed any shown?
I can't say I would actually know much about that at all, but something I do find interesting is, leaked documentaries, or like an internal propaganda, and it is even clumsier than a lot of the stuff that we're seeing. Like a lot of the rashness or character attacks or inconsistencies, I would say, emphasized on the very limited amount I've seen. And so I imagine that if they extend to Chinese proof of life videos, I have to say though, I haven't seen any, and I'm not sure where they would be published.
It is true that a lot of the videos that you analyzed for the report appear on platforms that are banned in China, like YouTube and Twitter. I don't know, William Nee, if the case of Chinese lawyers and activists, their videos, are they ever broadcast for a domestic audience? It seems like the authorities might not want to amplify their cases, but I was wondering if you know anything about it. Like, for instance, have there been Chinese news reports about Wei Minhai or any of the other cases that you've looked at?
Well, in terms of the videos domestically, I mean, I'm trying to think to what extent they were broadcast like domestically and like major channels. I could be wrong, but I don't think they were. I mean, I think that you could have found them certainly domestically, and they were played. I know some of them appeared on, you know, CCTV 13 and the news broadcasts, but I don't think that they were meant to be like, they weren't. They wanted to have them out there for sure, but they didn't want them to be like the focus of people's attention. And I don't know for sure about whether the Uyghur proof of life videos are the same thing domestically, but I would guess that they don't want to message it as to the broader population domestically. I mean, I think there, you know, as Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently said at his talk last Monday at the UN, you know, when you're talking about Xinjiang, you're talking about terrorism, I mean, and extremism. That's what he said. So, you know, that's the messaging I think they want to go with, that there's issues of terrorism that are being dealt with, there's development, there's tourism. I think those are kind of the broader themes that they want to promote. And if you have proof of life videos that are given I mean, if they were to give them a very large scale audience, I think they could be believed by many, but you would also have some percentage of people wondering about, well, why is this necessary? Why are foreign media saying this anyway? So I think that because of that, they want to keep the audience to people who are already on global channels. You know, if it's on the Global Times Twitter channel, first of all, you have to be on Twitter, which means that you already have to be on a VPN, which means that you are probably an affluent person domestically or studying abroad and know English. So from that point of view, you need that kind of counter messaging anyway. So I hope that's clear, that maybe it's trying to give a counter messaging to people who are already available to hear the messages from human rights groups and the international media, while at the same time not sending this broader message to a domestic population who is largely unaware about what's happening in the region. That's just my theory.
Mohammed Adam asks, are there cases where typical Han Chinese citizens are victims of any similar circumstances that Uyghurs face? Do they have similar punishments for using prohibited websites and channels of communication?
Yeah, I could take that real quick. I mean, there definitely are people who are increasingly being punished for like using VPNs. And there are increasing numbers of, you know, domestic like Han people who are being punished for their uses of Twitter and other you know, other social media. So I mean, I think that exists. Oh, one other thing on the videos I was going to say is that in connection with the lawyers' crackdown, there was a series of videos, not proof of life style videos, but they had, you know, like rock music videos that were talking about how the West wanted to make China into Syria. They had a rap one. They had like a hard rock heavy metal one. They had kind of a spoof of South Park one. So there was a variety of like videos, and many of them were tweeted out from the you know, on Weibo. But that was a little bit unique, and I think that was targeting the 2015 crackdown. But yeah, that's all.
Jason Harrington asks Ferkat that it sounds like the Chinese government is retaliating against you, and there's no doubt that it's retaliating against your mother. Would you say this is correct?
Yes, it is. So they don't like anyone to speak out themselves. They don't want anyone to make the China look bad on the international stage. So right after my mom was released, there was a Chinese secret agent. He reached out to me on WeChat, and then he was ethnic Chinese, but he was really fluent in Uyghur. So he didn't tell me that where does he work, but he said that he's really powerful enough, and then he knows everything about my family. Like, he said that he is the one who got my mom released from the camp, and then he can arrange that for her to get a Chinese passport and then to leave from China. So I just told him on the beginning that, like, what he wants to know, or like what he wants from me, and then what he can give it to me. Like, because all those people reached out to me with some reasons behind. On the beginning, he said that he wants to be my friend, but for the time being, he asked me to stop speaking out, like to decline all the interviews, everything. I was like, no, if I choose to stay silent, you guys will do whatever you want, or whatever you did to my mom. It will be the same story again, but I'll just lose my voice. So then we kind of got in not like really argument per se, but at the end she just said, like, you are just one person going against China, like whole country. Just imagine, and then you still have many family members, not only your mom, inside our borders. So it's a direct threat, but to sum up, it is a retaliation, not only to myself, but the people like what I did, like the people like myself, like speaking out against the Chinese government. But I knew that those videos, those things will come, those threats will come, and I started, and that was the same reason that I stayed silent for like 7 months after my mom was detained, and that was exactly the same reason that I talked to William in November 2017 through email when my mom was detained for the first time, and then when he asked permission to share my mom's story, I backed out because I scared that they will retaliate against what I do.
We have a question from UHRP's research director, Henry Sajewski. He asks, Uyghurs whose family members are targeted in proof of life videos are citizens and legal permanent residents of states outside of China. What should these states be doing to reunite Uyghur families across borders?
I want to take it first. Yeah, in 2019 November, the Chinese government released a statement, the official statement, saying that my mom is stuck in China, not because of the Chinese passport, because of the US visa, that she failed to get the US visa. So, but in reality, that she was already cleared by the US government. She went to the US embassy in Beijing, Guangzhou multiple times, that she wasn't, like, she got all her paperwork ready from the US side, but she wasn't able to leave China without a Chinese passport. So I spoke to multiple people inside the State Department as well as the Congress as well. Like, in those kind of situations, that the Chinese statement was the response against the US statement on the first step. So I really hope that the US government will just stand up and say, hey, look, so if it's a visa issue, we will take care of it. And then we are willing to accept this lady to come to the US. And then there's all the paperwork that you needed. Let her go. So that's the thing that I'm hoping from the US government as well. And I've been talking to multiple people as well to get a statement from the US side or some paperwork that says, you said that she was stuck because of the visa. Now we got everything squared. Now let her go. So that's my only hope, that in one day I can bring her to the US to reunite with the whole family. It's been too long.
Yeah, I think other states have a duty as part of you know, the International Convention of Political Rights to assist in uniting families, and that really does pertain here. Full assistance, like particularly with what I understand the China's bureaucracy to be right now. A lot of paperwork is needed all at once, and this tends to be hurried along when paperwork is ready on the other side. That being said, yeah, sometimes there are crossed wires, right? And on one of the proof of life videos, it definitely said that there was no visa when actually the visa was there, and it was paperwork on China's side. But I do think that when states allow other family members who are living under, you know, conditions that we know to be genocidal, we have to allow refugees in at that point. And, you know, demand information on what's happening. Another thing that states could be doing is making it harder for these news outlets to be broadcasting internally with such ease. You know, until very recently it was allowed on UK television, which is quite rash. So yeah, there are plenty of things that we could be doing.
I would just say, you know, that states should, as Emily was saying, be generous in trying to give more places to asylum seekers and refugees from the region, especially in cases perhaps where there are people who went to another country, let's say Japan or Turkey, and now find it difficult to renew their, whether it's their passports or get visas. You know, I think that first of all, those countries have an obligation under international law in terms of the principle of non-refoulement, not to return those individuals back to China because they face the potential of torture or other ill treatment. So they shouldn't, and some countries are still not abiding by that. But that's number one, is that no one should be forcibly returned back to the region under the current circumstances, in which it's very likely that just their fact of being abroad will be sufficient enough for them to be sent to these re-education facilities or prison. And then, of course, countries should be more open to have greater numbers of asylum seekers, given the magnitude of the crisis.
Anne Lau asks William Ni about the case of Gui Minhai. She says, what Lam Wing-Ki did in exposing such forced confession has proven that Gui was forced to make those statements, but he was still sentenced to 10 years. What can people do under such circumstance, and what recourse do Uyghurs in the Uyghur region have in these circumstances?
It's a tough question. Yeah, I mean, the Lam Wing-Ki really, if you go back to the history of the Hong Kong booksellers case, Lam Wing-Ki really kind of called out the state's narrative. I mean, they had had a series of kind of confession videos with Liepel and whatnot. And Lam Wing Ki, actually, I have an op-ed that I wrote from, I think, 2016. And I think The Diplomat on the Lam Wing Ki case that I'll post maybe on Twitter so you can see. But I mean, he basically gave detail to a lot of the things that we had speculated about residential surveillance in a designated location. What is that type of, UN experts have called that a form of secret detention with incommunicado detention. And, the Committee Against Torture has said to China quite clearly that China needs to revise its laws to come into line with the Convention Against Torture, which it has ratified. So, not only did we have that type of detention practice being practiced, but it's increased since then. And I think it's difficult to say, but I do think that the international attention arguably makes a difference. I mean, I think that for all of the attention on this is a very difficult case to make because you're kind of playing a counterfactual. But I do think that all of the attention on the lawyers' crackdown made a difference in how people were ultimately treated. And arguably, I mean, people are free to disagree, but I think that the attention on individual Uyghur cases also is very important because as Emily was saying, these videos are in a reaction to something that's already been out there in the international press. And I think there's also the narratives that the state wants to portray. They want to portray this whole region as Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, is all about terrorism and extremism. But when you talk about an individual case, when you talk about Ferkat's mother, or when you talk about Shafkat Abbasi, a man who's basically my age with 3 kids that I can very much relate to, who has his own thriving business and is detained incommunicado, that has nothing to do with terrorism or extremism. And anyone with the slightest bit of common sense can see that. And so I think that the individual cases are very important to bring out the humanity of the crisis that we're seeing. And when there's enough of those individual stories, then I think hopefully that can compel people to action.
Thank you for that. We have one last question from Nafisa Tassabaum, who's a student at Monash University. She says she's starting to research the Uyghur crisis and was asking for recommendations for testimonies from Uyghur victims and activists. I'm aware there are news reports, but I was wondering if there are specific campaigns or movements, online communities that I can look up. Beyond UHRP's website, which has many years of research, I would like to recommend the Xinjiang Victims Database, which, as Emily Upson mentioned, has not actually been attacked in the Chinese media, possibly because its volume of testimonies from Uyghurs is very difficult, and Kazakhs is very difficult to refute. I'm not sure if any of our panelists have any other recommendations that they would like to suggest.
Just to follow up on the Xinjiang Victims Database, Uyghur Pulse, the YouTube account is where like a lot of the video testimonies are recorded, and that's a very useful resource as well. Otherwise, on Twitter, just following activists who are bravely speaking out on a daily basis, really.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I would just quickly plug, last year around this time, Amnesty International, where I used to work, put out a report called No One Feels Safe, which they had interviewed, actually got information from hundreds of Uyghurs overseas, and I think 4 or 5 continents. And it also looked at the intimidation, as Ferkat was saying, of where you have state security agents trying to be your friend, and creepily trying to send you messages, trying to silence you. It looked at a lot of that, and there's also a lot of urgent actions that have been done on individual cases. But there are many good resources out there, and so yeah.
And William Nee mentioned Safeguard Defenders reports. I would also second that recommendation if you're interested specifically in how these forced confession videos work and other issues related to this sort of media apparatus. Before we wrap up, I would like to mention Thomas Lodge's question. He asks, as someone with no personal or professional connection to the Uyghur plight, what is the best way someone can help outside of bringing as much awareness as possible and donating to UHRP? Are there volunteer opportunities of some kind or some other way to move the needle? I do recommend that you go visit our What You Can Do page. We do have a list of suggestions for how members of the public who are concerned can contribute in terms of supporting legislation and other initiatives. I'm not sure if any of our panelists have any other recommendations for what a member of the public can do.
I mean, personally, I would recommend petitioning your local government even. I'm from the UK, so in that case, your MP, but really from the bottom up, a lot of states are listening to their citizens in how concerned or not they are about the Uyghur crisis. And, you know, big political changes are happening. And I think they are largely being encouraged ground up. So that's encouraging to see.
I would just say, by the way, Elise Anderson had a list of hashtags that are all very, very good on social media to learn more. So look at that. But yeah, talking to your local government, I think is important. And I see the What You Can Do is there. I think also if you happen to be a university student, you could try to plan an event, maybe some speakers, and I think also getting media attention that's not as good as like the BBC and New York Times and all of that is. But if you can get local media attention, that's positive because it gets a different type of audience to be aware of what's going on. And I think I'm a little bit shocked that as an American that many people still don't know about this. And then getting cross kind of unlikely solidarity is important. So I think of Rayan Assat, for her brother has been able to get a lot of Jewish groups, different university groups at Harvard involved, and I think that type of cross solidarity is also very powerful because it gets people who may not necessarily be interested in this issue to pay attention and build the solidarity with other causes too, and so that people who care about Uyghurs can also care about other issues. So it's mutually beneficial.
Well, thank you, everyone. We're just about out of time. We had a lot of great questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but I want to thank all our panelists for joining us and sharing their insights, and our audience for joining us to listen to this. Please follow us on Twitter and other social media and stay in touch. We have our emails posted on our website. With that, I will let everyone go, and thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye.